Hello, gentles and ladymen. Oh, almost screwed up there. I'm Ulan Gaming, and I'm making a second video in a row about Scottish immigrants. This time, rather than showing off a build order for the card, we're going to take a more analytical look at it. Scottish Immigrants has only been released for 3 days at the time of this video, and it's already one of the most talked about shipments in the game, probably because it's new, but also because it's pretty crazy. Often, people, when they talk about it, it's in the nerf it, it's OP context. So today I want to closely analyze the shipment, determine if and why it's OP, how to change it if it is, and all of that jazz. So, before we begin, if you have not watched my previous video showcasing my version of the USA Highlander Rush build order, I recommend you do so, as I'm using that exact build order for the context of this video. You don't need to have seen the whole video, just enough that you know the build order I'm performing for my calculations. The footage will also be playing periodically in the background of this video. Scottish Immigrants is an incredibly high value shipment at the cost of 350 coin, but I think that's somewhat deceptive in terms of what the shipment's real cost is. In order to evaluate the true cost of the shipment, you need to include the cost of all the buildings that boost how many of the Highlanders you get. I'll use my strategy as an example, and the rest of the video will be taken from the context of a 9 Highlander pot for a rush, since that's the source of the complaint. In order to get my 9 Highlanders in my rush, I need 4 trade posts, 3 saloons, and 1 church. There are other ways of getting 9 Highlanders, or even 10, by having more or less of the specified buildings. For example, you could have 6 trade posts and 1 saloon. But in the context of the Highlander Rush, this is how people are getting the 9 pop at 6 minutes. At roughly 6 minutes, 6:30. Saloons and trade post cost 200 wood each, and the church costs 150. So that brings the raw cost, without considering any other factors, for the church, for the 9 Highlanders, to be 1,550 wood and 350 coin, taking into account all 8 buildings and the cost of the shipment, making it a total of a 1,900 resource shipment. Highlanders cost 200 coin each, and 9 of them costs 1,800 coin total. Whereas most Age 2 shipments, mercenaries included, have a net gain value of about 700 resources, Scottish Immigrants, at face value at least, is unique among mercenary shipments in that it's actually providing a net resource deficit of 100 resources. In other words, it needs to be buffed to 2 Highlanders per building. Okay, bye. Thank you very much for watching. I'm just kidding. Of course, it's not exactly how it works, or fair to say that this makes it balanced, as this is ignoring an insane amount of factors, but I thought the additive cost was worth mentioning because it'll come up again. The value of 9 Highlanders is 1,800, and the total cost of adding all the buildings and the coin cost is 1,900. It's important information we'll store for later. Obviously, though, if the video ended with that, I would have a riot on my hands in the comments section. Which might actually be a net gain in terms of the algorithm. Decisions. I'm just kidding. Of course, the biggest thing to talk about is that the total resource cost, quote-unquote, is actually much smaller in terms of net loss, given that trade posts, saloons, and meeting houses, which are the buildings that determine how many dudes you get, all provide resource trickle. XP, in terms of the trade posts, both for the natives and the trade line, European natives excluded, since they don't have the XP trickle, coin trickle from the saloons, and both an XP trickle and a free tech for coin trickle from the church, since we get it through Philadelphia Convention. Obviously, none of these paid directly for themselves, since none of them provide wood, but XP is a resource, and having an abundance of ways to get it early on is one of the biggest strengths to USA. Through analyzing the conversion rates at Lombards, as well as the new Trickle per TC card to Portugal, it's clear that the devs see coin, wood, and XP to be similarly valuable on a 1-to-1 ratio, with food being the only one less valuable, taking 1.5 food to be equal in value to any of the other resources. Taking this into account greatly lowers the true cost of the card, and it's extremely difficult to pinpoint exactly what would be the true cost of the card, because it's obviously lower than 1,900, but Unless we were to take each building and calculate how long each trickle is in effect on an average normal run of the Highlander rush and then add it all together, I mean, that's a huge pain in the ass. So, of course, that's exactly what I did. I ran the strategy on a few games on New England without taking any treasures or eating any sheep. Did it a few times until I got a solid, smooth run of the strategy with as little interference or factors as I could. To represent the average run of the strategy, I grabbed 2 data posts and 2 trade line posts, since it's not often you can reliably attain 3 to 4 trade posts without having to burn at least one down. And that's even if the map allows for it. When I watched the replay of the games, and then I watched the replay of the games and recorded the times that both native trade posts came up, recorded the times all 3 saloons got built, and recorded the times the church went up, as well as the exact time the church tech arrived, and then the exact time that the Highlander shipment arrived. Then I watched the replay again and counted how many passes my 2 trade line posts receive, and wrote down the number of XP they got for each pass. Then I calculated how long each trickle was active before Scottish immigrants arrived, took that number of seconds and multiplied it by the trickle value to get how many resources each building and the church coin tech gave. And then I added them all together. 891. That's the total number of resources each trade post, saloon, church, and coin tech provided before Scottish immigrants arrived as a shipment. Then I took our original number of 1,900 resources and subtracted 891 from it and got a resource cost for the shipments of 1,009, being the net cost. Then to calculate the net resource gain of the shipment, you just take the value of 9 Highlanders that we had earlier, which is 1,800 resources as the value of the shipment, and subtract 1,009 from it, and almost unbelievably, this whole thing ends up being a net gain of 791 resources. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I read this, because that's only 91 resources above the standard H2 shipment value, and this was at peak efficiency with my build order. If you over-chop or gather food, or over-gather food even a little bit, and are late getting a saloon up, or late collecting 350 coin for a few seconds, shipping to ship Philadelphia Convention, or late shipping Philadelphia Convention hitting H2, any of which can happen as a product of of Explorer micro battle with a tough treasure or another Explorer, or even just bad luck hurting, would lower this value and make it close to 700. I was almost shocked, as a matter of fact, that the resource value was not that the resource value on my calculations was not like further away from 700. It's shockingly close. Now, some of you would also point out that most of these buildings are provided for free in the build order through use of several shipments and techs, such as the military wagon from Age Up, Philadelphia Convention, and Chinese Immigrants. However, I don't believe that changes any of the above calculations, since none of these are free either. They all come at the cost of the shipment itself, and by sending these buildings and abilities, you're actively choosing to do so instead of the far more standard and eco-efficient French immigrant start, which still reigns king as best start even after having the 50 extra wood attached to it. The buildings just don't show up for free. You're actively shaping your shipments and build order to make them. Chinese Immigrants in particular has the steep price of taking up your levy, and if you ask any USA player, making Minutemen with the levy at every given opportunity is a huge part of being skilled and efficient and successful with USA. Of course, you can also argue that Chinese Immigrants allows the levy in this build order to give 1 extra Highlander twice instead of these 6 militiamen, and there is some merit to that. But all this is to say that, shockingly and almost unbelievably, the Scottish Immigrants shipment is worth very close to a standard H2 shipment in terms of net resources gained, assuming you're doing a 9 Highlander rush, and takes a good chunk of opportunity cost by having you give up French immigrants and batches of Minutemen that are much harder to determine the numerical value to. All that said, however, there is the quality of the contents of the shipment itself to consider as well, not just the resource value. Good God, that was a sentence that I could have written better. Highlanders have 400 HP and 63 attack. Having 9 of them makes Scottish Immigrants ship you 3,600 HP onto the field as early as 6 minutes and 20 seconds, roughly, using my build order. This is, of course, insane value. Their stats are roughly comparable to carded and arsenal to Age 4 Maltese Sentinels. It's a little silly. Now, I thought for a bit that the obvious counter to this would be to scout out this mega telegraph build order and ship spies, the ultimate hard counter to mercenaries. But on that note, there really is zero way to hide your strategy if you're making 3 trade posts in Age 1 and saloons in transition and you have Scottish Immigrants in your deck. You are screaming at the top of your lungs exactly what you are doing for your rush, and there is zero denying it. And anyone who doesn't see it coming when they see the obvious signs is silly. But let's talk about spies for a sec. Spies do 100 damage to mercenaries in melee per hit. However, I discovered recently, rewatching my video, that Highlanders have 40% melee resistance, meaning they only take 60 damage per hit. This makes spies take 7 hits to kill each Highlander. Granted, this is still a huge improvement from trying to kill them with something like skirmishers. But the fact that the damage is so heavily lowered means that the 9 Highlanders can actually fight toe-to-toe with the spies, with the spy shipment, and come out on top, albeit with very heavy losses, and leaving the Alhoots and other outlaws that you make to pick up the slack for the push. Now, this is all under the assumption that the only spies that the enemy has are from the 6 spy shipment, and they haven't trained any from the church. Instead opting to make other units to deal with Alhoots and whatever else I send at them. But this whole thing doesn't feel quite right to me. As with a shipment as crazy as Scottish Immigrants to help boost your push and your brush, I feel that if you make the right counter decision and are flexible enough to know to ship spies, you should decimate the Highlanders in the rush. After all, it's a showcase of skill and how you can adapt to your opponent's strategy and move to counter them. You deserve the victory for shipping the counters, and in that regard, I feel like Scottish Immigrants either needs to be nerfed or there needs to be a change to how spies work, and I have a few ideas on how to go about that. Because at the moment, it is admittedly too strong. I'm perfectly fine with the fact that 9 Highlanders is really powerful in a push. What I'm not fine with is that they can go toe-to-toe with spies without getting obliterated, at least for a few spies. So the first possibility of what we could do would be to lower the maximum number of Highlanders the shipment can give you to only, say, 6 or 7. However, I don't think this would change much in terms of how powerful the rush is. It would just change the unit combo when the rush arrives. Under this scenario, making 3 saloons is rendered completely unnecessary, and the Chinese Immigrants doesn't even need to be the first shipment you send to cap out. The USA player could theoretically just do a French immigrant start and follow a Chinese Immigrants in Philadelphia convention, building a trade post in transition to 2, and sending Scottish Immigrants as the 4th card and getting 6 Highlanders. The difference here is that the USA player's eco would be notably stronger, and he'd have plenty of time to make lots of regulars from the barracks, that he can in the barracks that he can make from age up, since he's no longer obligated to make a saloon. Lowering the cap of Highlanders from this shipment would basically be exchanging 3 Highlanders from saloons and getting potentially 10 or more regulars instead. So my next thought is to lower the melee resistance of Highlanders themselves so that you could ship the spies, so that when the enemy ships spies, they're more likely to kill the Highlanders faster. But doing this also greatly lowers the fighting capability of Highlanders in the 3rd Age when you would get them normally and be able to train them. And so I wasn't really a fan of that nerf idea either. And so we arrive at my final thought process for how to balance the Scottish Immigrants shipments. And this last idea is probably the craziest and least likely to happen, but also the most DE style of fixes in the worlds. So here it is, my solution. Add a resource cost, I suggest food, add a resource cost to the spy shipment, and then crank the number of spies you get to, like, 9 or 10. And then make it so that it's kind of universal, so that every civilization has a resource costing spy equivalent shipment. And so the enemy, you scout the enemy is doing the Scottish immigrants, and you go, boom, let me spend the resources to preemptively get, like, 10 spy shipments. And I think this is not only the best balanced decision to counter this extraordinary rush with an extraordinary countermeasure that completely shreds it, but it's also just straight up the most DE thing in the universe. If everything is OP, nothing is OP. That is the DE style, you know. It has always been the DE style. It would also just be really nice to have access to a huge spy shipment for when things get hairy and you need lots of spies. Like, even in the Third Age, it would be a really good shipment. A hell of a lot useful than just the 6 that you get normally across the board. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk today, ladies and gentlemen. What do you guys think of the Scottish immigrant shipment? What do you guys think of my fix suggestions? Leave a comment below, as well as other things on this update you think I should take a look at that warrants a video. Thank you so much for watching, have a great day, and goodbye. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This was, as ever, a ton of fun to make. If you enjoyed the video, please do consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out, and have a great day.